Air India Flight 171. In less than a minute after leaving Ahmedabad Airport, Air India Flight 171, a Boeing 7878 Dreamliner bound for London Gatwick, plunged into the hostel block of BJ Medical College, leaving 260 dead and 68 injured. On board were 242 people, 230 passengers, and 12 crew. Only one man, 40-year-old British citizen Vishwash Kumar Ramesh, walked away alive, escaping through a torn emergency exit after his section of the fuselage broke off. His brother, seated elsewhere, was among the dead. The jet reached just 625 feet in altitude before disaster struck. Both engines lost thrust when their fuel control switches moved from run to cut off seconds after liftoff, something that could only happen during engine shutdowns on the ground. These switches are built with metal stop blocks to prevent accidental movement, but the preliminary investigation offered no explanation for why they disengaged. Cockpit voice recordings captured a chilling exchange. One pilot asking why the other had cut off met with the reply, "I did not." The impact tore through 5 buildings, sparking intense fires that burned at an estimated 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit, complicating victim identification. Among those killed was former Gujarat Chief Minister Vijay Rupani. Over 300 firefighters, backed by the army, police, and disaster teams, battled flames and sifted through debris. The crash marked the first fatal accident and total loss of a 787 since the aircraft entered service in 2011. Compensation was swift. Tata Group, Air India's parent, pledged $120,000 per deceased passenger and covered medical costs for the injured, later extending the same to victims on the ground. Under international law, families may also receive about $180,000. While the cause remains under investigation, the case has already raised urgent questions about aircraft safety systems, pilot procedures, and overlooked maintenance advisories, issues that could shape aviation safety for years to come. Angara Airlines Flight 2311. On July 24, 2025, an Antonov An-24 RV with 48 souls aboard descended toward Tinda Airport in Russia's Amur Oblast. The aircraft, nearly half a century old and steeped in Soviet aviation history, had weathered decades of service across multiple airlines. That morning, it departed Blagovenchensk after a refueling stop, already delayed over an hour due to weather. Visibility at the destination was poor, forcing a missed approach. On the second attempt, radio silence replaced expected position reports. Radar contact was lost at 1 p.m. local time. 10 miles from Tinda, amid forested, swampy terrain, the aircraft lay broken and burning on a mountainside. No distress call had been made. By the time rescue teams carved a path through the wilderness, reaching the site at 11 p.m., all 42 passengers and 6 crew members were confirmed dead. Among them were 5 children, a Chinese national, employees of Russian railways, an oncologist, and a stewardess whose birthday was days away. One woman survived only because she missed the flight when her granddaughter fell ill. The captain, a 61-year-old veteran of military and civil aviation, was joined by a younger first officer, a flight engineer, and 3 other crew. Despite the aircraft's 4 recorded incidents since 2018, it had passed inspection and held an airworthiness certificate valid until 2036. 3 days of mourning were declared in the regions. Families of the victims were promised $63,000 in compensation. Condolences flowed from leaders across Armenia, India, Belarus, China, Egypt, and Kazakhstan. Investigators recovered the cockpit voice recorder, which revealed no system malfunctions, but the flight data recorder was destroyed in the post-crash fire. The cause remains under investigation, a final chapter yet unwritten in the story of a flight that nearly reached the safety of the runway, but instead vanished into the clouds and the quiet of the forested hills. Potomac River mid-air collision. An absolutely heart-wrenching collision occurred on January 29, 2025, over the Potomac River, forever changing lives in an instant. An American Airlines regional jet, Flight 5342, carrying 64 people, was on its final approach to Washington National Airport when it collided with a U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopter. The helicopter, with a crew of 3, was on a training flight, a routine annual evaluation with night vision goggles. In a flash, both aircraft crashed into the icy river, tragically claiming the lives of all 67 people aboard. The impact was so severe that the airliner reportedly split into 3 pieces and the helicopter was found upside down. It was the first fatal crash for American Airlines in over 23 years and the deadliest U.S. air disaster since Flight 587 in 2001. Among the passengers on the jet were 28 members of the U.S. figure skating community, 11 athletes between the ages of 11 and 16 along with their parents and coaches. They were returning home from a national development camp in Wichita, Kansas, and the direct flight to D.C. was their most convenient route. This devastating loss echoes the 1961 Sabina Flight 548 crash, which killed the entire U.S. figure skating team. The victims included 4 former Soviet Russian figure skaters who had become coaches in the U.S., including a married couple who were world champions. Beyond the skating community, the crash also claimed the lives of a civil rights attorney, 2 financial analysts, and several other citizens, including 2 Polish-American nationals and a Danish citizen. It's a tragic story of a flight that was a victory for the city of Wichita, finally connecting it directly to the East Coast, but ended in an unimaginable loss for so many families. Light Air Services Beechcraft 1900 crash. On a late January morning in 2025, a 23-year-old Beechcraft 1900D lifted off from the red dirt strip at GPOC Unity Airstrip in South Sudan's Unity State. Chartered to carry oil workers in Juba, the small twin prop belonged to Eagle Air but was flying under Light Air Services. On board were 21 people, 16 South Sudanese, an Indian, 2 Chinese nationals, and 2 Ugandan pilots. Their employer, the Chinese Petroleum Consortium, GPOC, had arranged their trip. 10 minutes into the flight, witnesses saw the aircraft lose height. One recalled a wing breaking away before the descent. The Beechcraft struck the ground hard, flipped upside down, and scattered debris across the bush. The initial toll was put at 18, but as news clarified, 20 of the 21 aboard had died, 2 of them succumbing in the hospital. The only survivor, a South Sudanese engineer, was airlifted to Bentiu in critical condition. 2 passengers had missed the flight entirely, a twist of fate that spared them. Confusion over the manifest led to some early reporting discrepancies. By evening, bodies were flown to the capital's morgue, and the names of the lost began circulating among grieving families. President Salva Kiir publicly mourned the dead, offering condolences to the victims' relatives and the oil company's staff. Ethiopia and Egypt issued similar messages. But not everyone stayed silent on causes. Terman Yangadwech of the Center of Peace and Advocacy accused South Sudan's aviation authorities of lax oversight, pointing to aging aircraft still in service. Investigators quickly retrieved the black box, sending it to the United States for analysis. New Zealand's Accident Commission joined the effort, armed with historical records from the aircraft's previous life with Eagle Airways. Singapore's Transport Safety Investigation Bureau also offered expertise. The cause remains officially unconfirmed, but the final climb of 5X RHB has already entered the country's aviation tragedy list, a sharp reminder that some flights never reach cruising altitude. MedJet's Flight 056. The tragic narrative of MedJet's Flight 056 unfolded on a chilly January evening of 2025 in Philadelphia. A Learjet 55 air ambulance, on a mission of hope, crashed into a neighborhood just moments after taking off. On board were a young patient, a girl named Valentina, her mother, and a crew of 4, all Mexican nationals. They were on their way back home, a journey that began with a celebration at a Philadelphia hospital where Valentina had just completed 4 months of treatment. But their flight was catastrophically short-lived. The aircraft lifted off and climbed to about 1,650 feet before it simply fell from the sky, captured on a doorbell camera in a terrifying freefall. The Learjet was plummeting at a rate of 11,000 feet per minute, a staggering and unrecoverable descent. It slammed into the Castor Gardens neighborhood with a cataclysmic impact, creating a massive explosion and fire that spread to homes and businesses. On the ground, the community paid a heavy price. 2 people were killed and 23 others were injured. The crash destroyed 4 houses and damaged another 17. One person was even struck by debris inside a diner, a shocking reminder of the chaos and destruction that followed the high-impact collision. As investigators began to sift through the wreckage, they made a disturbing recovery. The plane's cockpit voice recorder, which should have contained crucial information about the final seconds of the flight, was inoperative. A preliminary report revealed it had likely been that way for years. This revelation casts a dark shadow over the flight's operator, Jet Rescue Air Ambulance, which had experienced another fatal crash just 15 months prior. The tragedy shines a light on the crucial importance of a functioning safety system and raises serious questions about the oversight of such life or death operations. Jeju Air Boeing 737-800 disaster. Jeju Air Flight 2216 was in its final minutes from Bangkok to Muan when fate intervened in the most unexpected way. Migratory ducks, invisible on the approach path, were sucked into both engines. The pilots, faced with a sudden drop in thrust, called a mayday and initiated a go-around. But the crisis deepened. On the second approach, the landing gear failed to deploy. The aircraft slammed into the runway, skidding for more than 1,000 feet before striking a concrete structure. The violent impact tore the plane apart, killing 179 of the 181 souls on board. The only survivors, 2 flight attendants from the rear, were pulled from the fractured tail section, battered but alive. The strangeness didn't end there. Both flight recorders had cut out just moments before the Mayday call, erasing the crucial seconds leading to disaster. As investigators pieced together the chain of events, a troubling picture emerged. Muan Airport sits in the path of heavy bird migration and carries a bird strike rate far above other major South Korean airports. Yet it was the concrete obstacle, a component of the instrument landing system, that stunned aviation experts. It had been rebuilt solid instead of frangible, meaning it would not break away on impact. The modification was made only a couple of years earlier, and many believe the aircraft would have stopped safely had that barrier not been there. Authorities have floated a theory that in the chaos, one pilot mistakenly shut down the healthy engine instead of the damaged one. This possibility has fueled heated disputes between the pilots' union and grieving families, both arguing that systemic failings and infrastructure hazards share equal blame. What remains is a haunting blend of mechanical failure, environmental hazard, and human error, a convergence that turned an ordinary landing into a national tragedy. Bangladesh Air Force FT-7B GI fighter jet crash. In Dhaka, Bangladesh, what began as a routine solo training flight for Flight Lieutenant Tokir Islam Sagar ended in a scene of devastation few could comprehend. Piloting a Chengdu FT-7B GI fighter jet, he lifted off from BAF base Bir Uttam AK Kandkar. Moments later, a mechanical failure rendered the aircraft unresponsive. The control tower urged him to eject, but at such a low altitude, survival was improbable. Below stretched one of the world's most densely populated cities. Determined to avoid mass casualties, he wrestled the stricken jet toward open ground. His efforts fell heartbreakingly short. The fighter tore into the main gate of Milestone School, where classrooms were full. Security cameras captured the moments the aircraft punched through the building, trailing fire and debris. The final toll was staggering. 36 lives lost, including 32 children, 3 teachers, and the pilot. Among the dead was Meheran Chowdhury, a teacher who, after ushering students out, ran back into the flames to save more than 20 children before succumbing to her burns. Shock quickly gave way to outrage. Why were high-risk military training flights conducted over a teeming urban center? The Air Force attributed the disaster to technical failure, but critics noted the F-7 series' long history of crashes. Rumors swirled that the actual death toll was higher, fueling protests from grief-stricken families. Demonstrations turned violent, and public fury ultimately forced the dismissal of an education secretary. The government declared a day of mourning, pledged an inquiry, and vowed to honor the fallen. Yet the incident has become a rallying point for deeper demands. Questions about airspace management, urban safety, and transparency remain unresolved. And in Dhaka's crowded streets, the memory of a pilot's final choice and the lives lost despite it still burns hotter than the flames that day. Antonov An-26 crash, Omdurman, Sudan. The Antonov An-26 lifted off from Wadi Sidna Air Base on a late February evening, bound for Port Sudan, carrying high-ranking officers and crew. Just minutes into its climb, the military transport plunged into a densely packed neighborhood of Omdurman, the twin city of Sudan's capital. The explosion tore through homes, scattering debris and plunging nearby streets into darkness as power lines collapsed. The wreckage burned fiercely, leaving only scorched foundations where families had lived moments before. 17 people aboard perished instantly, alongside 29 civilians on the ground. Among the dead was a senior army commander, a loss that resonated in military circles. At least 10 more civilians, including children, were rushed to local hospitals with injuries ranging from shrapnel wounds to severe burns. Witnesses described a deafening blast followed by the sickening roar of fire consuming the wreckage. Early reports from military sources point toward a technical malfunction, though the timing raised eyebrows. It came just one day after the rival Rapid Support Forces claimed to have shot down a fighter jet in South Darfur. The official line insists this was not active war, but in a country fractured by 2 years of brutal conflict, suspicion lingers. The ongoing civil war has left Sudan divided, with the army holding the north and east while the RSF controls much of Darfur and parts of the south. Omdurman, already scarred by fighting, has now endured one of the deadliest aviation disasters in the nation's recent history. In the aftermath, rescue workers sifted through twisted metal under the glow of generator lights, searching for survivors and recovering the dead. Families gathered outside hospitals, some clutching photos, others waiting for news they feared would confirm the worst. For a nation at war, the crash was more than an accident. It was another wound in a body already bleeding. Bering Air Flight 445. In the fading light of February 6, 2025, Bering Air Flight 445 lifted off from Unalakleet bound for Nome. This single-engine Cessna 208B Grand Caravan carried 9 passengers and 1 pilot. Utility workers, community members, and professionals making the familiar hop over Norton Sound. The plan was simple: an afternoon flight, arrival by 4:20 p.m., and back to normal life. But somewhere over the frozen expanse, that plan unraveled. The pilot had just informed air traffic control he'd circle while Nome's runway was cleared of snow. No distress call followed. Just a sudden, catastrophic drop in altitude and speed. By 3:18 p.m., radar contact was gone. 30 miles southeast of Nome, the plane slammed into an ice floe. The wreckage was discovered the next day. No one had survived. The victims ranged in age from 30 to 58, their loss rippling across tight-knit Alaskan communities that knew too well the dangers of bush flying. Search teams battled brutal winter weather. Volunteer firefighters, state troopers, the Coast Guard, even fellow Bering Air pilots, scanning the shifting ice. The floe itself was drifting 5 miles away, making recovery a race against an approaching storm. By February 9th, all bodies were retrieved. In the days that followed, grief took the form of prayer vigils, heartfelt statements, and community solidarity. Leaders from the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium honored 2 of their own who had died on the trip, while Alaska's governor and senators offered condolences. When the NTSB released its preliminary findings, a grim detail emerged. The aircraft was overloaded, 1,058 pounds over the limit for icy conditions, more than 800 over even in clear skies. Ice had formed on the tail, compounding the weight issue. A flight that should have been routine instead became another reminder of how unforgiving Alaska's skies can be.